What if a single decision in the year 200 could change the fate of millions? What if the laying of one stone in the steamy jungles of Central America set in motion a chain of events that would ripple through centuries across continents and into our own present day? On this day, more than 18 centuries ago, the Maya world stood at a crossroads, and history chose a path that still shapes us today. 200 AD. In the deep green expanse of Mesoamerica, morning mist clings to towering ceiba trees. Birds cry out over limestone ridges. In a clearing, hundreds of people gather as a king raises his hands toward the rising sun. A temple is not yet complete, but its outline already dominates the canopy. Behind the king stands his queen, adorned with jade beads and woven cotton. The air tastes of copal incense, heavy and sweet, drifting skyward as an offering. The smell mingles with sweat and anticipation. In the shadow of that pyramid, a people believe their gods watch closely. Hello, everyone. Tonight I'll take you back to a moment in history, the 2nd century, the Maya lowlands of what is today Guatemala and Honduras, a rainforest alive with sound, yet hiding the ambition of humankind. Their name was Yajao Te Tainich, a ruler of Copán, whose dynasty would one day carve stairways of glyphs and raise monuments that whispered across time. He lived in a world where the sun and stars were gods, where blood fed the cosmos, and where every stone carried sacred weight. That world was about to change forever. Before we begin, if you enjoy stories like this, hit like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? It's incredible to see people around the world sharing this same moment together. In just a few seconds, your screen will begin to dim. That's not a glitch. It's designed to protect your eyes from blue light. Science shows blue light suppresses melatonin, the hormone that helps you rest. When your screen dims, your brain will understand it's time to unwind. So, turn off the lights, put your headphones on, let's begin. The Maya did not build overnight. They rose from scattered farming villages, each family tending maize, beans, and squash in small forest clearings. Over centuries, these settlements coalesced into ceremonial centers. Priests marked the movement of Venus farmers, timed planting to celestial cycles, and early kings tied their authority to the sacred order of the heavens. By 200 AD, the classic Maya period had dawned. Cities like Tikal in Guatemala and Copán in Honduras began to stretch skyward. Stone masonry replaced wood and thatch. Hieroglyphs etched dynastic memory into stele stone slabs that told stories of rulers, victories, and bloodlines. Yet this was more than architecture, it was ideology carved in limestone. Every stairway, every carved serpent head, reminded the people that their rulers were not merely human, but intermediaries with the divine. The Maya believed the universe had 3 layers, heavens above the living earth and the watery underworld below. Sacred caves and pyramids mirrored this cosmology. To walk up a temple stair was to ascend toward the gods. To enter a tomb beneath was to touch Xibalba, the underworld of trials and spirits. Life revolved around cycles of time. The Maya developed calendars that tracked not only solar years, but ritual cycles of 260 days, weaving together astronomy, religion, and governance. Priests warned kings when Venus would rise, when eclipses would darken the sun, when offerings must be made. Through ritual bloodletting, rulers bled for the gods, ensuring fertility of land and stability of cosmos. Even at this early stage, the weight of sacrifice loomed large. But grandeur was costly. To raise monuments, rulers commanded labor from farmers. To feed cities, swidden fields spread deeper into the jungle. To legitimize power, kings performed ever more dramatic rituals. Copán, Tikal, Palenque. These were not only cities, but experiments in human ambition, testing how far belief and organization could stretch in a fragile ecosystem. And hidden beneath those stones, archaeologists today find traces of forgotten royals. Some tombs lie beneath stairways, sealed with offerings of jade and shells. In Copán, one burial even held pools of liquid mercury, shimmering like water of the underworld. Scholars ask who lay inside, a mighty king, or perhaps a woman warrior who defied every expectation. That mystery, like so many in Maya history, lingers. One sealed chamber could rewrite dynasties. One lost ruler could shift our understanding of collapse. The story of the Maya is not merely about ruins in the jungle. It is about resilience, innovation, and a haunting reminder that civilizations, no matter how brilliant, stand on fragile ground. The cities of the Maya did not simply emerge. They were carved out of relentless jungle, engineered in ways that dazzled neighbors and still puzzle archaeologists. By the 4th century, Copán rose as a jewel of the southeastern Maya world. Its plazas sprawled across limestone terraces, ball courts echoed with the thud of rubber spheres, and stairways lined with hieroglyphs preserved the deeds of rulers. Each building carried meaning, not just utility. A temple was a mountain of the gods, its summit a threshold where kings could pierce their flesh and draw sacred visions from the smoke of burning paper. To the west, Tikal became a beacon of power. Its twin pyramid complexes were aligned with the solstices binding politics to astronomy. When the sun reached its furthest point, light would cast perfect shadows across temple steps, signaling to farmers and priests alike that cosmic order was intact. To stand in Tikal's great plaza was to feel dwarfed, not only by towering structures, but by the weight of divine kingship itself. Palenque too flourished in Chiapas, Mexico. Nestled against hills, its palaces displayed open courtyards, towers, and reliefs of gods entwined with rulers. Together, these centers represented nodes in a web of sacred politics, stretching across hundreds of miles. Life within these urban hearts was stratified. At the top stood the Kuhul Ajor, the holy lord surrounded by nobles who administered tribute, scribes who etched records, artisans who shaped jade and obsidian. Farmers, though forming the majority, often lived outside city cores, trekking inward with tribute in maize, cacao, or crafted goods. In return, they received security ritual intercession and the assurance that their rulers maintained the cosmic balance. Yet this balance demanded constant display. Kings staged ceremonies that merged spectacle with theology, reminding subjects that their rulers' blood and sweat held the universe together. The plazas were theaters of ideology. Imagine a festival day, drums thunder, conch shells blare, nobles in feathered headdresses march in procession. The king, painted in blue, steps onto a platform. He holds obsidian blades, ready for ritual bloodletting. As drops fall onto bark paper, attendants burn it, sending columns of smoke skyward. In that moment, the city witnesses their ruler, bridging the human and divine. Such rituals affirmed both cosmic stability and political legitimacy. But cities were not static. They competed. Alliances and rivalries erupted into warfare. Captives from these wars fed into the machinery of ritual sacrifice. Victories demanded monuments, each stone carved with hieroglyphs that boasted of divine sanction. Yet beneath this grandeur lay fragility. The limestone cast of the lowlands made water scarce in dry seasons. Populations swelled straining systems of reservoirs. Farmers cleared forests sometimes beyond sustainability. Still for centuries, kings projected permanent. Archaeology reveals this duality splendor, above ground stress beneath. Excavations in Copán show intricate urban planning, with elevated causeways linking plazas. Residences of artisans clustered around elite compounds, while commoners dwelled further out. Pottery shards speak of meals, trade goods trace far-flung connections. Yet in the heart of Copán lies something more tantalizing: sealed chambers beneath stairways, crypts that might contain rulers erased from memory. In one case, mercury traces shimmered a dangerous but symbolic element linked to underworld waters. Offerings of jade beads, shell ornaments, and sacrificed animals suggest high status. Still, a question lingers. In one such chamber, bones tell a story that upends assumptions. They belong not to a king, but to a young woman. Her presence challenges long-held beliefs about gender roles in Maya leadership and warfare. Was she an elite warrior, a queen who commanded armies, or a captured noblewoman whose death sealed cosmic bargains? The more archaeologists dig, the more the Maya story fractures into nuance. These were not faceless masses building monuments for distant gods. They were individuals, communities, lineages, each bound by belief in cycles of time and duty to the divine. And sometimes those beliefs demanded extraordinary sacrifices. One limestone panel depicts such a moment, a queen kneeling, pulling a rope studded with obsidian through her tongue, blood soaking paper strips that would be burned. The image shocks modern eyes, yet for the Maya it was proof of devotion, a guarantee that crops would grow, that rain would fall, that ancestors would return in dreams. This was power at its rawest pain transformed into legitimacy. And so, as the smoke cleared from plazas and the echoes of drums faded into the forest, the people went back to their homes, convinced the world had been set right again. But each ritual demanded more. Each king pushed boundaries further, and eventually the costs would become unbearable. The heart of Maya power was not only stone and spectacle, but belief itself. Their universe was alive with gods who demanded attention, and every layer of existence had meaning. Above stretched the heavens tier upon tier, where celestial beings guided planets and stars. Below lay Xibalba, the underworld, a place of trials ruled by lords of death. Between these realms lived humankind charged with keeping cosmic order in balance. To falter meant chaos, drought, famine, and war. Myth anchored this worldview. The story of the hero twins Hunahpu and Exbalanque echoed through murals and codices. Born of a decapitated father, they descended into the underworld, outwitted its lords, and rose again as sun and moon. Their victory was not just entertainment, it was proof that sacrifice could lead to rebirth, that death itself could be conquered through ritual. Every king who bled for the gods echoed the twins' journey. Every ballgame reenacted their struggle. The court was not a sport, but a theatre of myth, where the bounce of a rubber ball across stone echoed cosmic battles. For the Maya blood was the most precious offering. Unlike food or incense, it carried life force itself, a substance that fed gods and ancestors. Rulers held sacred duty to provide it. They opened veins in their tongues, and genitals the pain a sign of sincerity. Blood dripped onto bark paper, which priests burned to release smoke visible prayers to invisible powers. Sometimes vision serpents appeared in the trance, bringing forth ancestors or gods. These visions were depicted on stone lintels and stelae, making private agony into public proclamation. Consider Lady Suk of Yaxchilan. On a carved lintel dating to 709 AD, she kneels with a rope threaded with obsidian blades drawn across her tongue. Drops fall onto paper soon to be burned. From the rising smoke, a vision serpent curls upward, carrying the image of a warrior or ancestor. The scene immortalizes her pain as proof of devotion, ensuring her husband's reign remained legitimate. For the Maya, such images were not macabre. They were reassurance that leaders bled for the people. Power flowed through performance. To rule was to convince subjects that cosmic stability depended on ritual. Public ceremonies tied communities together, binding farmers and nobles in shared awe. Yet they also reinforced hierarchy. Only the nobility, particularly rulers and their spouses, had the authority to open sacred portals through blood. Commoners offered food, incense, and sometimes self-cutting, but royal blood was uniquely potent. It carried the essence of dynasties, connecting rulers directly to divine forces. Sacrifice extended beyond bloodletting. Captives taken in war were displayed, humiliated, and finally offered to the gods. Their deaths sanctified victories, feeding not only political narratives, but religious necessity. Some were decapitated, others thrown into sacred wells, others burned or bound in tombs beside kings. To modern sensibilities, this seems brutal. To the Maya, it was balance human lives given, so that crops might grow, rains might fall, and cycles continue. This spiritual economy explains why archaeology so often finds human remains in contexts of ritual. A royal tomb might contain not just one body, but several companions, guards or sacrificial victims, accompanying the elite into the afterlife. At Copán, beneath a hieroglyphic stairway, bones revealed a startling mix. 3 men with cut marks on their skulls, alongside offerings of jade and shells. Nearby, mercury gleamed in pools, shimmering like the underworld's waters. But the central figure was not a king, it was a woman. Her bones told of hardship. A fracture on her forearm suggested combat the so-called parry fracture, likely from warding off a blow. Isotope analysis hinted she was not local, perhaps brought from afar. Her burial among elite symbols raised questions. Was she a captured noblewoman sacrificed in death? Or was she honored as a warrior in her own right, elevated to stand beside kings? Either answer unsettled assumptions about Maya society, revealing roles for women that defied the neat categories we once imagined. These discoveries deepen the paradox of Maya life, a civilization of breathtaking beauty, mathematical genius, and ecological adaptation, yet also one where ritual demanded pain and death. To live under Maya kingship was to believe that one's ruler bled for the people, that war prisoners fed the cosmos, that every drop of blood kept the world turning. In such a world, sacrifice was not cruelty, but necessity. And yet, sacrifice also raised questions. How much could be given before the cost outweighed the benefit? Could a system built on ever more elaborate displays of devotion survive its own demands? These questions linger as we peer deeper into tombs and stairways. For now, what we know is this: the Maya saw no boundary between politics, religion, and survival. To them, the cosmos itself was political, and rulers proved their worth in blood. Imagine the plaza filled with incense and drums. At its center, a queen kneels before thousands. In her hands, she holds a rope woven with obsidian blades and stingray spines. Slowly, deliberately, she pulls it through her tongue. The sharp edges slice flesh, and blood drips onto bark paper laid out in a bowl. Attendants wait with torches. The queen's face is composed, almost serene, even as pain must have seared her nerves. For the Maya, this act was not grotesque. It was devotion made visible. The blood-soaked paper is ignited. Smoke curls skyward, carrying her life force to the gods. On carved panels from Yaxchilan to Copán, these moments are recorded with care. Above the queen's kneeling, figure artists etched the rising form of a vision serpent. From its jaws emerges an ancestor or a deity, answering the offering with presence. To witness this in stone is to glimpse the fusion of agony and transcendence. To witness it in life must have been unforgettable. Kings too bore this burden. They pierced their genitals, an act even more excruciating to release blood. Fire consumed it, transforming pain into sacred dialogue. To stand before subjects and bleed was not weakness. It was proof of divine favor, a demonstration that the ruler himself suffered to keep the universe in balance. In doing so, kings claimed legitimacy. Their right to command labor, tribute, and allegiance flowed not only from ancestry, but from their willingness to endure torment for the gods. These rituals were political theater of the highest order. The plaza became a stage where rulers dramatized their indispensability. Imagine being a farmer who had walked for days to deliver maize tribute. You stand among a crowd of thousands, see your queen bleeding for the gods, your king, raising torches into smoky air. You return home, convinced without their sacrifice, your crops might wither, your children starve, the sun fail to rise. That conviction bound people to rulers more tightly than armies could. But the rituals did not stop at bloodletting. Captives taken in war were paraded through plazas. Some were bound and forced to play the ball game, the sacred reenactment of cosmic struggle. For them, the outcome was grim. Losers could be decapitated, their heads mounted on skull racks called sompantli. Victorious kings displayed these trophies as proof that they, like the hero twins of myth, had triumphed over death's lords. The message was clear: cosmic order was intact, secured by royal suffering and enemy blood alike. For archaeologists, such practices are preserved not just in carvings but in bones. At sites like Copán, remains show cut marks consistent with ritual killing. Inscriptions boast of captured lords sacrificed at rival cities. Even architecture echoed sacrifice. Ball courts were flanked by stone rings where balls could pass through, a feat nearly impossible. To score was to reenact myth, and the cost could be life itself. In this way, sport, religion, and politics merged into one. The queen's rope and the king's torch became metaphors for authority. To rule was to bleed, to endure, to ignite. Without such displays, dynasties risked losing credibility. A king who failed to stage rituals might face revolt, famine, or invasion. Thus, ritual cruelty was not optional. It was structural. It held the social contract together, assuring people that rulers bore ultimate responsibility for balance between worlds. Modern readers often recoil at the thought of bloodletting and sacrifice. But to the Maya, these were not acts of sadism. They were exchanges in a cosmic economy, no different than offering incense or maize, only more potent. Blood was currency, life force repaid to the gods who had given life in the first place. To refuse to give it back would be sacrilege, inviting disaster. And so rulers gave again and again, even at the cost of their own bodies. Yet there is a limit to how much pain and death a system can demand. Each generation of rulers sought to outdo the last, to stage bigger rituals, to capture more enemies, to shed more blood. What began as proof of devotion risked becoming unsustainable spectacle. In this arms race of sacrifice, the seeds of strain were planted. Still, for centuries it worked. The cosmos turned, maize grew, cities thrived. But beneath the surface, cracks waited to spread. Beneath the famous hieroglyphic stairway of Copán lies a mystery that has captivated archaeologists for decades. To the eye, the stairway is a triumph of classic Maya art, a grand cascade of more than 2,000 carved blocks, each etched with glyphs narrating the lineage of Copán's rulers. But under its weight, sealed in darkness, rests a chamber unlike any other. When excavators tunneled into its heart, they found not only offerings of jade beads, shells, and animal remains, but also something startling: mercury, pooled in small cavities shimmering like liquid mirrors. Mercury was dangerous, yes, but in Maya symbolism, it represented the sacred waters of the underworld, a portal between realms. Whoever lay here was meant to journey not just into death, but into cosmic eternity. Archaeologists expected the tomb to hold one of Copán's great kings, perhaps a missing figure in the dynastic sequence. After all, the stairway itself was an architectural monument to royal memory, inscribed with the deeds of rulers going back centuries. To discover a burial beneath it seemed too perfect a chance to unite text and body. Yet, as the bones were studied, doubts emerged. The central skeleton belonged not to a long-reigning king, but to a young woman. Her grave goods were prestigious, yes, but not overwhelming. Around her were 3 male skulls, bearing cut marks, evidence of sacrifice companions, sent with her into the afterlife. A jaguar skeleton hinted at royal associations its power invoked for protection. And the mercury gleaming in sealed darkness spoke of ritual symbolism rather than practical burial custom. Who was this woman honored in such a place, yet surrounded by death and danger? The possibility of misinterpretation haunted the excavation. Could this be a secondary burial? Perhaps a ritual dedication placed centuries after the stairway was built? Or was she herself a ruler erased from official records? Some scholars noted isotope signatures, suggesting she was not born in record. Copán. Her bones carried traces of a different water and soil, marking her as foreign. If so, was she a royal bride brought to Copán to cement alliances, or a captive noblewoman sacrificed in grand ceremony? Yet her burial posture and offerings imply status. The jade ornaments, though fewer than those of great kings, still signal nobility. The jaguar, a creature tied to kingship, reinforces the association. And the stairway's symbolic weight adds to the mystery. Why place her here in the very heart of Copán's dynastic memory, if she were not of tremendous importance? Forensic analysis revealed more. Her forearm bore a fracture consistent with blocking a blow known as a parry fracture. This suggested combat rare for women in Maya society, or at least rare in the records we have. Was she a warrior? Or was the fracture a remnant of captivity, a struggle before her capture? Each possibility paints a different picture. A queen who fought alongside men, or a noblewoman dragged into ritual death. The three male skulls complicate the story further. Their cut marks indicate execution, likely beheading. They may have been retainers sacrificed to accompany her, or prisoners whose deaths amplified the ceremony's gravity. The jaguar too may have been killed for the event, its spirit bound to hers in the underworld. Together, they form a tableau of ritual violence and elite symbolism. What emerges is a portrait both fascinating and unsettling. Beneath the stairway built to immortalize Copán's kings, the bones tell of a woman who does not fit the expected narrative. Her presence disrupts neat categories of gender, power, and ritual. She may have been a ruler overlooked by texts, or a political pawn immortalized in sacrifice. Either way, her burial forces us to reconsider what it meant to hold power or to be consumed by it in the Maya world. As archaeologists closed the chamber, one thought lingered: every sealed tomb has the potential to rewrite history. The hieroglyphs above proclaim dynasties of kings. The bones below whisper a more complicated truth, one in which women, captives, and even animals shared the stage of sacrifice and memory. And the shimmering mercury, still dangerous after centuries, reminds us that the Maya blended science, symbolism, and spectacle in ways we are only beginning to understand. The bones of the young woman beneath Copán's stairway began to tell a story that unsettled long-held assumptions. She was in her mid-20s when she died young. For someone interred with such symbolic weight, her teeth showed signs of elite care, polished, well-preserved, perhaps even inlaid with jade, a marker of status in Maya society. Yet her skeleton bore evidence of struggle. A fracture on her forearm matched what osteologists call a parry fracture, the kind of break that occurs when someone raises an arm to block a blow. This was not the quiet life of a cloistered noblewoman. It was a life that brushed against violence. Isotopic analysis deepened the mystery. By examining the chemical signatures in her bones, scientists traced her origins not to Copán, but to a region far to the north. The strontium isotopes reflected the water and soil of another land. She had traveled, whether as a bride sent to seal an alliance, a diplomat's daughter, or a captive dragged across miles of jungle, we cannot be sure. But she was not born in the shadow of Copán's pyramids. Surrounding her were three men, or rather, their skulls. Each bore cut marks across the base, clear evidence of beheading. Their presence alongside her hints at ritual sacrifice. They might have been attendants, loyal companions sent into the afterlife to serve her spirit. Or they may have been captives offered in blood to sanctify her burial. In either case, their deaths heightened the significance of the event. This was not a routine interment. It was theatre meant to echo through eternity. Nearby offerings confirmed the ceremony's weight. Jade beads glistened among the remains, still vibrant after centuries underground. Shells imported from distant coasts testified to the reach of Maya trade networks. A jaguar skeleton lay carefully arranged its death, a potent invocation of royal power. Jaguars symbolized the underworld night and kingship itself. To bind her with such a creature was to elevate her beyond ordinary status. And then there was the mercury shimmering dangerously pooled in hidden cavities. Its presence was no accident. To the Maya, mercury embodied sacred water, a medium between worlds. It was deadly, yes, but symbolically perfect. Who then was she? Some argue she was a queen, perhaps a ruler in her own right, erased from written records, but honored in death. Others suggest she was a foreign noblewoman, brought to Copán to forge bonds, but sacrificed when politics shifted. Still others imagine her as a warrior, her broken arm, a scar of combat, her youth cut short, not by battle, but by ritual necessity. The truth may never be certain. Yet the very ambiguity forces us to reconsider Maya society. Women may have held roles more complex than once believed. Ritual actors, warriors, even leaders whose memory lingers only in bones. The implications stretch further. Her burial beneath the hieroglyphic stairway suggests a deliberate act of memory-making. The stairway itself was a dynastic billboard proclaiming royal legitimacy. To place her beneath it was to embed her story, however silent, into the heart of Copán's identity. Whether as honored queen, tragic captive, or sacred offering, she became inseparable from the city's lineage. Archaeology has no inscription to explain it, but her presence beneath the glyphs challenges the narrative carved above. For the people of Copán, attending her burial would have been a profound spectacle. Priests chanted nobles, offered incense drums, reverberated against limestone walls. The sacrificed men and jaguar heightened the ritual's gravity. Smoke rose from burning paper soaked in blood. The stairway above loomed each glyph a witness. And when the chamber was sealed, her story was locked away, waiting for centuries until modern archaeologists uncovered it. Today, her bones remind us that history is rarely neat. It is full of contradictions, erased names and voices that resurface in fragments. Beneath one of the greatest monuments of the Maya world rests a woman who refuses to be forgotten, even if we cannot yet speak her name. Her fractured arm, foreign origins, and elite offerings stand as testimony to a life and death that defied expectation. Why did the Maya spill so much blood, bury so many lives, and build their politics on sacrifice? To them, the answer was simple. The universe itself demanded it. The Maya believed time moved in cycles. Suns rose and fell, worlds were born and destroyed, and humanity's role was to keep the cosmos turning. Sacrifice was not cruelty, it was maintenance, as vital as planting maize or tending reservoirs. Without offerings, the balance would fail. Crops might wither, rains vanish, armies falter. To give life was to keep life. This worldview drew from myth. In the Popol Vuh, the sacred text of the Kich, Maya, the hero twins, sacrificed themselves before rising again as sun and moon. Their story was not allegory, but instruction. By bleeding, by dying, humans could renew the world. Rulers performed bloodletting to echo the twins, ensuring fertility for their people. Captives offered in sacrifice became living embodiments of myth, reenacting the eternal struggle between light and darkness. Rituals of sacrifice were woven into every level of society. Farmers offered first fruits at planting and harvest. Priests cut themselves with stingray spines to mark holy days. Nobles staged more elaborate acts, tongue-piercing, genital bloodletting, and in moments of crisis, the killing of captives. Royal funerals often demanded companions, attendants, and sometimes war prisoners to accompany the deceased. These deaths were not seen as murder, but as necessary exchanges, gifts to gods who gave life in the first place. Archaeology bears this out. At Copán, the young woman buried beneath the stairway was not alone. 3 men were killed alongside her. Their skulls, marked by execution. Elsewhere, tombs contain retainer, sacrifices animals, and even offerings of children. At Chichén Itzá's sacred cenote, divers have recovered bones of men, women, and children thrown into its depths, evidence of mass sacrifice meant to appease gods during drought or crisis. Such acts, though shocking to us, made sense within Maya cosmology. Water, blood, and life exchanged for cosmic stability. Sacrifice was also political. Victories in war were incomplete until captives bled on altars. A captured noble sacrificed in a rival city was the ultimate humiliation, proof that one dynasty had broken another's link to the gods. Inscriptions brag about such events, detailing the capture and offering of rival lords. Public display amplified the message. The gods favored the victor, and the defeated were stripped not only of life, but of cosmic legitimacy. Even architecture reflected this ideology. Ball courts, where captives sometimes played their final game, symbolized the struggle of life and death, echoing the hero twins' mythic contest. The Tzompantli, or skull racks, displayed severed heads in neat rows, both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Temples often contained sacrificial remains in their foundations, offerings meant to animate the stones themselves with life force. To walk through a Maya city was to move through a landscape infused with sacrifice, where bones, blood, and architecture converged. This emphasis on sacrifice also shaped daily psychology. For commoners, watching their ruler bleed was reassurance that cosmic order was secure. For rulers, the burden was immense. They were expected to suffer publicly, to shed blood, not only in private rituals, but before crowds of thousands. Their legitimacy depended on endurance. A king who refused to bleed or who failed to offer captives risked being seen as illegitimate, his dynasty vulnerable to rivals. Pain was proof of piety. Yet this system raised questions about sustainability. As cities grew larger and demands more elaborate, how much sacrifice could society bear? Each drought or famine intensified ritual expectations. Each defeat required greater offerings to restore balance. In this spiral, sacrifice shifted from sacred duty to a pressure that strained communities. Still, for centuries it worked. Farmers planted rains, came rulers reigned. Sacrifice was not only about death, it was also about life renewed. For the Maya, every drop of blood was a seed, every offering a promise. The smoke of burning paper carried prayers upward. The splash of bodies in cenotes echoed across sacred waters. To them, these acts were as essential as water and sun. To us, they reveal a worldview where survival itself was a constant negotiation with the divine. And beneath it all lay a deeper truth. Sacrifice was not just ritual, it was the mechanism by which the Maya understood their place in the cosmos. To give life was to sustain life, to bleed was to renew, to kill was to balance. And in that cycle, the Maya built one of the most dazzling civilizations the world has ever seen. The brilliance of Maya civilization was not only in its rituals or monuments, but in the practical genius that allowed cities to thrive in environments where survival seemed impossible. Few challenges were greater than water. The lowlands of Guatemala and Honduras sit on porous limestone. Rain sinks quickly through soil, disappearing underground. Streams are rare, and during the long dry season, months could pass without a drop of rain. For commoners and nobles alike, the question was constant. How would they drink, wash, and farm when the skies withheld water? The answer lay in engineering. By the height of the classic era, Maya rulers promised their people that they alone could command the forces of nature. Their proof was not only in temples, but in reservoirs, vast, carefully planned systems carved into limestone lined with clay and positioned at the heart of cities. At Tikal, one of the greatest urban centers, water management reached staggering scale. Archaeologists have mapped chains of reservoirs, some as long as football fields, each linked to palace plazas and temple courtyards. Rainwater channeled off roofs, and stone causeways collected in these man-made lakes, ensuring supply through the dry months. But storage alone was not enough. With tens of thousands living in close quarters, contamination was a constant threat. Stagnant pools could breed disease, foul smells, or toxic algae. The Maya faced a paradox. Water was life, but without control, it could also bring sickness and death. The ruler's prestige rested on solving this problem, for a king who failed to provide safe water risked rebellion as surely as one who lost a war. At Tikal, excavations revealed evidence of astonishing foresight. In the Corriental Reservoir, scientists discovered layers of zeolite and quartz sands carried from quarries nearly 20 miles away. Zeolite, a volcanic mineral, acts as a molecular sieve, trapping heavy metals and harmful microbes. Quartz sands similarly filtered debris. Together, they formed a purification system so advanced it anticipated techniques used today in modern water treatment. For a civilization without metal tools or beasts of burden, transporting tons of zeolite was an act of immense labor and political will. Yet the reward was clean water, a resource worth more than jade. Imagine the ritual of unveiling such works. A king leads his people to the reservoir after rains. Priests sprinkle incense. Nobles cast offerings into the water. Farmers kneel in gratitude. The king proclaims that the gods have blessed his reign with purity, that the very elements submit to his will. In truth, it was human ingenuity that made this possible. But to the Maya, the divine and practical were inseparable. These systems were not isolated. Cities across the lowlands built dams, canals, and cisterns. In some places, sacred cenotes, natural sinkholes filled with groundwater, were adapted into reservoirs. In others, artificial terraces slowed runoff, conserving moisture for crops. Everywhere, water was both necessity and symbol. To control it was to prove legitimacy. To lose it was to invite collapse. Yet danger always lingered. Even zeolite could not fully stop contamination. Layers of sediment revealed traces of mercury and cyanobacteria in reservoirs' poisons that could sicken entire populations. Mercury, once used in rituals and pigments, leached into water systems. Cyanobacteria thrived in stagnant pools during drought. For farmers drinking from these reservoirs, illness must have been common. The gods, it seemed, always demanded their due. Still, the scale of achievement is undeniable. In landscapes where European colonists centuries later struggled to find clean water, the Maya had engineered purification centuries before. Their reservoirs were not simply utilitarian but sacred, surrounded by temples and altars. Water was life. Water was ritual. Water was proof of power. The story of Maya engineering shows a civilization balancing on a knife's edge. On one side, ingenuity allowed them to build cities larger than any in North America until the modern age. On the other, fragility meant a single drought or poisoned reservoir could trigger disaster. The Maya knew this. They staged rain ceremonies, invoked Chak, the storm god, and demanded rulers prove divine favor by keeping water flowing. When rains failed, when reservoirs soured, pressure mounted, and cracks, once small, began to widen. The more archaeologists study Maya reservoirs, the clearer it becomes these were not just storage ponds. They were laboratories of innovation, carefully designed to protect entire populations from invisible threats. For centuries, the people of Tikal and other great cities drank from waters that had been purified through methods rivaling our own. But the challenge of keeping water clean was relentless, and nature always found ways to test human ingenuity. The Corriental Reservoir stands as a striking case. Sediment cores drilled from its floor revealed traces of zeolite, the volcanic mineral hauled from distant quarries. Zeolite's lattice structure traps harmful substances, absorbing metals and filtering microbes. Mixed with quartz sands, it formed a powerful purification layer. This was no accident. Someone centuries ago realized that lining reservoirs with this imported material improved taste, clarity, and safety. The discovery implies not only trial and error, but a scientific curiosity woven into ritual practice. The Maya did not separate religion from technology. To them, the act of cleaning water was as sacred as bloodletting. Yet other reservoirs told darker stories. The palace reservoir at Tikal, central and prestigious, held sediments rich in mercury. The source may have been cinnabar, a red pigment made from mercury sulfide used in rituals and burials. Priests ground it into powders for offerings unaware or perhaps unconcerned that it leached into the very water people drank. By the 9th century, cyanobacteria blooms appeared in several reservoirs, filling waters with toxins capable of causing liver failure. These invisible poisons transformed life-giving reservoirs into threats. Still, the people drank. They had little choice. The dry season could stretch 4 or 5 months when streams ran dry and wells collapsed. The reservoirs were lifelines, and whatever their dangers, they sustained cities of tens of thousands. For rulers, this meant water was not merely a resource, but a promise. Each king's legitimacy depended on keeping reservoirs full and drinkable. A drought, a poisoned pool, a failed purification system, any of these could be read as divine disfavor, a sign that the king no longer held the god's blessing. The politics of water shaped every level of society. Farmers and laborers hauled stones, clay, and volcanic sands to line reservoirs. Nobles oversaw construction, framing it as royal gifts to the people. Priests blessed the reservoirs, casting offerings into their depths. Jade beads, pottery, sometimes even human sacrifices to sanctify the waters. Every refill of rain became a moment of ritual tying community survival to cosmic cycles. The system worked so long as balance held. But balance is fragile. A city that grew too fast strained its reservoirs beyond capacity. A prolonged drought could dry even the largest tanks. Contamination, once seeded, spread quickly through entire neighborhoods. Archaeological evidence suggests that as the 9th century approached, more and more reservoirs became compromised. Populations may have turned to less reliable sources, drinking from stagnant pools or shallow wells, further spreading disease. In this light, the story of Maya water management is both triumph and warning. Triumph because they engineered the earliest known water purification system in the Americas centuries, ahead of its time. Warning because no system is invulnerable. A civilization that could align temples with solstices, chart Venus across the heavens, and haul volcanic minerals through jungle, still struggled against bacteria too small to see. Nature always pressed back. And as the 9th century drew closer, the cracks widened. Crops failed more often. Reservoirs fouled more quickly. Kings who once boasted of divine favor now faced whispers of weakness. The very system that had legitimized their power, the promise of water, began to betray them. For centuries, the Maya had built on the belief that their rulers could sustain cosmic order. But when water turned bitter, when rains failed, when thirst spread, that belief faltered. And with it, the foundations of political authority began to shake. The reservoirs had given life. Now they hinted at collapse. Long before the classic Maya collapse, their skies bore omens in ash and fire. Central America is a land stitched with volcanoes, their silhouettes rising over jungles like sleeping giants. The Maya lived in their shadow, and at times those giants woke. When eruptions struck, they reshaped not only landscapes but societies. Volcanic ash carried both promise and peril. It could devastate crops in one season, yet enrich soils for generations to come. To the Maya, eruptions were cosmic messages, destructive, yes, but also fertile gifts wrapped in terror. The most active volcano in the region was Pacaya, south of present-day Guatemala City. Archaeological layers show that its eruptions repeatedly dusted fields with ash. Farmers skilled at adapting learned to harness this. Thin layers of volcanic ash once weathered enriched soil, with minerals boosting maize yields. This paradox made volcanoes both feared and revered. They destroyed villages, yet over decades they renewed fertility. Rulers used such events in rhetoric. When ash fell, it was framed as a divine sign, proof that gods tested but also blessed the people. But eruptions also carried more immediate threats. Ash clouds darkened skies, contaminating reservoirs with fine particulates. Crops could be smothered outright. In some eruptions, winds carried plumes far across the lowlands, disrupting harvests hundreds of miles from the vent. Archaeologists studying lake sediments have identified at least 3 major volcanic events, coinciding with periods of political upheaval. One, around the late 6th century, struck during a time of dynastic turbulence, compounding stress on already fragile systems. Another, in the 9th century, overlaps eerily with signs of population decline and urban abandonment. The Maya understood volcanoes through the lens of cosmology. They were sacred mountains, places where the underworld touched the sky. Eruptions were not random disasters, but communications from deities. Priests staged rituals to interpret their meaning, offering incense, jade, even human lives to appease the fiery mountains. Myths spoke of creation emerging from such places, of gods shaping new worlds in bursts of fire. To live with volcanoes was to accept cycles of destruction and renewal, echoes of the cosmic cycles that defined Maya timekeeping. Yet even a worldview that framed disaster as divine balance could not erase the human cost. When winds shifted, ash could devastate regions unprepared for it. Prolonged eruptions may have driven migrations, forcing farmers to abandon exhausted fields. Cities already dependent on fragile reservoirs faced new contamination from ashfall. The cumulative effect was not a single apocalyptic event, but repeated shocks, each one eroding resilience. One vivid example lies in El Salvador, where the Ilopango eruption around 535 AD blanketed much of Central America in ash, one of the most powerful volcanic events of the first millennium. Although predating the height of classic Maya cities, its memory likely lived on in oral tradition. Centuries later, when lesser eruptions struck, rulers could have invoked ancestral knowledge of devastation and renewal. This deep memory shaped how the Maya interpreted natural events, not as isolated misfortunes, but as part of cosmic cycles, repeating across ages. Archaeological evidence suggests that some eruptions coincided with notable cultural shifts. Populations moved, dynasties weakened, and trade routes rerouted. Volcanic activity, while not the sole cause, may have pushed already strained systems closer to collapse. Just as droughts stressed water supplies, eruptions tested agriculture and faith. Together they formed a 1-2 punch that rulers struggled to counter. In rituals following eruptions, rulers likely promised restoration. They staged sacrifices claiming to mediate with gods of fire and earth. But if recovery lagged, if ash-choked fields stayed barren, if reservoirs soured, the people's faith could waver. The Maya system depended on the belief that kings stood between their subjects and cosmic chaos. When natural forces overwhelmed them, legitimacy cracked. The story of volcanoes in the Maya world is thus one of duality, destroyers and creators, omens and opportunities. They enriched soils that fed millions, yet their eruptions destabilized kingdoms. In that tension lay both resilience and fragility. For a civilization balanced so carefully on cycles of nature, volcanic ash was a reminder that no human system, no matter how ingenious, could fully command the earth. When trying to reconstruct the fate of the Maya, scientists turned not only to temples and tombs, but to lakes. In the still waters of the Yucatan and Guatemalan lowlands, sediments accumulated year after year, layer upon layer, storing memory like pages of a book. By coring these lakes, pulling up columns of mud and silt, researchers unlocked an archive spanning centuries. Each layer recorded the climate, the environment, even the intensity of human activity. In effect, the lakes became historians, their sediments testimony to both natural forces and human choices. One of the most revealing indicators came from nitrogen. Farming, especially the cultivation of maize, leaves nitrogen signatures in the soil that wash into lakes. High nitrogen levels in sediments point to active agriculture, dense populations, and fields under constant cultivation. Drops in nitrogen suggest the opposite: abandonment of farmland, decline of communities, a shrinking footprint of human presence. By measuring these traces across centuries, scientists could map the rise and fall of the Maya, not by stone inscriptions, but by chemical whispers. In cores from lakes near key cities like Tikal, a dramatic story unfolded. For centuries, nitrogen levels remained high, reflecting robust agriculture. Then, near the end of the 9th century, came a sudden plunge. Within a few decades, nitrogen values dropped sharply, suggesting fields were abandoned, populations fled, and once thriving landscapes fell silent. The correlation with the archaeological record was striking. At the very moment stelae ceased to be carved, temples ceased to rise, and cities emptied the lakes, told of collapsing agriculture. Other clues confirmed this narrative. Leaves preserved in sediments allowed precise dating, through radiocarbon analysis anchoring the timeline. Pollen grains revealed shifts in vegetation. Maize pollen, once abundant, diminished. Forest species returned, filling spaces once cleared for farms. The picture was clear. As political authority faltered, people abandoned intensive farming, and nature reclaimed the land. The collapse was not instantaneous, but swift enough to leave a chemical scar visible more than a millennium later. This evidence challenged older theories of sudden catastrophe. No single drought or war alone could explain the scale of abandonment. Instead, the lake suggested systemic unraveling. Farming had sustained enormous urban populations for centuries, but once confidence in rulers waned, whether due to failed water systems, warfare, or environmental stress, the agricultural engine faltered. Without labor to clear fields, tend crops, and maintain reservoirs, the system collapsed. The nitrogen drop was the echo of human withdrawal, the silence of deserted farms. The lake cores also revealed resilience before the fall. Periods of volcanic ashfall or drought showed temporary dips in agriculture, but farmers recovered. The system absorbed shocks until it couldn't. The late 9th century plunge was unprecedented, deeper and longer lasting than earlier fluctuations. It marked not a temporary crisis, but a structural failure. Populations shrank dramatically. Urban centers emptied. Dynasties ended. The Maya world, once vibrant with ritual and labor, fell quiet. Yet even in this collapse, continuity lingered. Some nitrogen traces persisted at low levels, evidence that pockets of farming survived. The Maya did not vanish. Communities retreated, reorganized, shifted to new centers like Chichén Itzá. But the old system, the sprawling classic cities, with tens of thousands relying on engineered water and intensive maize, was gone. The lakes recorded its death with stark clarity. For archaeologists, this convergence of natural science and human history was transformative. Stones tell us what rulers wanted: remembered victories, rituals, divine claims. Lakes tell us what actually happened on the ground, when people planted, when they fled, when the land fell silent. Together, they reveal collapse not as a single dramatic event, but as a slow withdrawal, a fading heartbeat measured in nitrogen. For years, the story of the Maya collapse was told as one of sudden disaster, a narrative of mighty cities brought low by a catastrophic drought that parched reservoirs and starved millions. It was a tidy explanation, nature's wrath overwhelming human ambition. Yet as evidence accumulated from lake cores, soils, and inscriptions, the picture grew more complex. Droughts certainly came, but so did volcanic eruptions, shifting trade networks and relentless farming that strained the land. The truth was not a single hammer blow, but a web of pressures slowly tightening until the system cracked. Climate played a role. In the 9th century, multiple lines of evidence point to reduced rainfall across the Maya lowlands. Reservoirs shrank, crops withered, and desperation grew. Kings who once claimed to control the rain god, Chak, faced crises of legitimacy, when skies remained clear. Inscriptions invoking rain rituals become more common in this period, suggesting mounting anxiety. But climate alone cannot explain why some cities endured while others crumbled, nor why collapse stretched across decades rather than erupting overnight. Equally important was overuse of the land itself. Centuries of intensive maize cultivation, fueled by growing populations, exhausted soils. Hillsides were stripped fields, expanded deeper into fragile ecosystems, and deforestation spread. Without trees, erosion worsened, topsoil thinned, and yields declined. Farmers worked harder for smaller harvests, tethering survival to increasingly vulnerable land. When droughts arrived, already exhausted fields failed catastrophically. The collapse was not nature against humanity. It was humanity pushing nature beyond recovery, then facing the consequences when climate stress struck. Archaeological evidence supports this. In some lake cores, nitrogen levels remain high until the very moment of collapse, showing that farmers pushed agriculture to the edge, maintaining intense production despite diminishing returns. When collapse came, it was sudden, not because nature struck a blow, but because the system had no buffer left. One failed harvest cascaded into famine. One dry year turned into abandonment. Meanwhile, political demands only grew. Rulers built ever more elaborate temples and staged grander rituals, requiring labor and tribute from subjects already stretched thin. The cycle of sacrifice and spectacle consumed resources that might have supported resilience. Kings competed to outdo rivals building monuments, while fields silently eroded. Legitimacy demanded performance, but performance drained the system. When drought came, there was no surplus left to cushion the fall. This perspective reframes the Maya collapse as a story not of sudden apocalypse, but of systemic fragility. The environment set boundaries, but human choices determined whether those boundaries held. For centuries, the Maya managed their landscape with ingenuity, reservoirs, terraces, crop rotations. But as populations surged and politics demanded growth, those strategies reached their limits. Collapse was not inevitable, but once thresholds were crossed, it became irreversible. The lesson resonates today. We too live in systems that appear resilient, cities that feed millions, technologies that buffer us against drought or flood. Yet beneath the surface, pressures accumulate: soil exhaustion, water contamination, climate change. Like the Maya, we depend on balancing human ambition with natural limits. Their story warns us what happens when balance breaks. Even amid collapse, however, Maya civilization did not vanish. New centers arose in the north, like Chichén Itzá, where different political and religious strategies offered temporary stability. The shift underscores that the collapse was not uniform but patchy, varying across regions. Some dynasties fell quickly, others lingered. Some farmers fled to forests, others adapted with new techniques. The system as a whole fractured, but pieces endured, evolving into something new. In this sense, collapse was not an ending, but a transformation, one that exposed the fragility of power built on overuse. Climate stress lit the spark, but overfarming, soil exhaustion, and political spectacle filled the chamber with fuel. Together, they explain why one of history's most dazzling civilizations faltered not in a single cataclysm, but in the grinding weight of accumulated choices. If Copán and Tikal revealed the grandeur of royal power, then Palenque showed its refinement. Nestled in the lush hills of Chiapas, Palenque rose not as the largest city, but as one of the most elegant. Its rulers mastered the art of architecture, weaving stone, light, and myth into palaces that remain striking even today. In the heart of the city stood the palace complex, a sprawling maze of courtyards, corridors, and carved panels. Here, kings staged ceremonies that fused politics with spectacle, ensuring subjects never forgot that the fate of the cosmos and the fate of their dynasty were one and the same. One building captured this fusion vividly: the palace tower. Rising above the complex, it allowed kings to survey the city and beyond, a symbol of authority and divine oversight. From its height, smoke from incense fires curled upward, drifting over courtyards where captives were displayed. To walk into Palenque's palace was to enter a theatre of power where every stone whispered loyalty and submission. Even the toilets carried symbolism. Archaeologists uncovered drains and latrines that funneled waste away with surprising efficiency. Cleanliness and control of water within the palace mirrored the king's promise to manage both earthly order and cosmic balance. Inscriptions at Palenque capture this ideology in sharp relief. One panel depicts Kini Shanaba Pakal, the city's most famous ruler, in triumph. Beneath his feet lies a bound captive, a visual declaration of victory and divine favor. The image is not subtle, it proclaims, to anyone entering that Pakal ruled not just by lineage but by conquest. These carvings transformed corridors into hallways of memory, each stone a reminder of past victories that justified present authority. Yet the palace also contained quieter messages. Some panels record ritual bloodletting with kings and queens, drawing their own blood to open portals to the divine. Others commemorate dynastic continuity, listing ancestors whose spirits hovered over ceremonies. Together they created a living archive, a space where politics, ritual, and memory converged. For nobles walking these halls, every glance at a glyph or carving reinforced their role in sustaining royal power. For commoners admitted on special occasions, the effect must have been overwhelming walls that spoke with the voices of gods and kings. But Palenque's artistry was not confined to walls. Captives themselves became part of the architecture of power. Bound prisoners were paraded through courtyards, humiliated before crowds, and sometimes sacrificed as part of state rituals. Their suffering sent a message as clear as any inscription. Palenque's rulers commanded not only stone and time, but life and death. To resist them was to resist the gods. This blending of spectacle and suffering extended beyond Palenque. Across the Maya world, cities broadcast their strength through public display. Yet at Palenque, the refinement of art and architecture made the message particularly potent. The palace was less a fortress than a stage, where every corridor, stair, and plaza was a backdrop for performance. When Pakal emerged from a doorway carved with his image, he was not just a man, but the embodiment of centuries of lineage, myth, and cosmic duty. Such displays reveal a truth about Maya. Politics' power was never secured by force alone. It was sustained through constant messaging, etched in stone, dramatized in ritual, embedded in architecture. Rulers understood that legitimacy was fragile, always needing renewal. By inscribing their victories into the very walls they ensured, future generations would walk among reminders of their might. And yet these messages also expose anxiety. To display captives so prominently is to acknowledge that rivals threatened. To proclaim victories endlessly is to admit that legitimacy was contested. The palace's beauty masked underlying fragility, a need to reassure subjects again and again that the dynasty held divine favor. Pakal's triumphs still tower in Palenque's ruins. But behind the elegance lies the same dynamic that shaped all Maya cities. A relentless effort to prove authority, to fuse ritual conquest and spectacle into one. The palace was not just a home. It was a monument to control, a space where art and intimidation worked together to hold a kingdom together. The splendor of Maya civilization was not confined to temples and palaces. It was inscribed on the human body itself. From birth, children of noble families were shaped literally into living symbols of status and beauty. One of the most striking practices was cranial modification. Boards or bindings were placed against infants' heads, gradually reshaping the soft skull into elongated forms. To us, it may seem strange, even cruel, but to the Maya, a sloping or tall forehead was a sign of nobility and refinement. It distinguished elites from commoners, the chosen from the masses. When such children grew, their very appearance proclaimed lineage before they spoke a word. This reshaping was not only about aesthetics. It carried cosmological meaning. A sloped forehead mirrored the maize god, whose head was elongated in mythic depictions. To resemble him was to embody fertility, prosperity, and divine favor. Walking through a Maya city, one would see elites with these transformed heads, their profiles echoing gods, their bodies reinforcing ideology. The modification required patience and parental devotion, for the process began in infancy and continued for years. In this way, belief and biology intertwine. Teeth carried similar messages. Maya artisans mastered the delicate art of dental modification, drilling tiny holes into living enamel to insert precious stones. Jade, obsidian, hematite, these inlays glittered as their wearers smiled, laughed, or spoke in council. For nobles, jeweled teeth were more than decoration. They were statements of wealth, access to trade, and divine sanction. Some teeth were filed into sharp points, enhancing dramatic effect. To gaze on a lord whose mouth shone with jade was to be reminded that he stood closer to gods than to commoners. These practices reveal how the Maya conceived of beauty as inseparable from identity and power. The body itself became a canvas, a proclamation of belief, adornment extended beyond bone. Skin bore tattoos, and paint hair was styled into elaborate forms, ears and noses stretched with jade plugs and shells. Nobles walked as living artworks, their bodies embodiments of cosmology. Even commoners, though excluded from the most extreme modifications, participated with simpler ornaments. The entire society shared a belief that beauty was not natural, but crafted, cultivated through devotion. Ritual bloodletting also left its mark. Scars on hands, arms, or tongues bore silent testimony to sacrifices made. For rulers, such scars were honorable reminders that they had fed the gods. For the people watching, they were reassurance that their leaders bore the weight of suffering. In this sense, the body was not just ornamented, but consecrated, its very flesh turned into a site of legitimacy. Archaeology confirms the ubiquity of these practices. Skulls from elite burials show deliberate reshaping. Teeth drilled with astonishing precision. Sometimes, with tools tipped by obsidian, still glitter with inlaid jade, after more than 1,000 years underground. Such finds remind us that Maya artistry was not confined to stone and clay, it extended to the intimate fabric of human life. These were societies where appearance was never casual, always a reflection of cosmic order, and yet beneath the beauty, fragility persisted. Such modifications were irreversible, binding individuals permanently to the roles expected of them. A noble child with reshaped skull and jeweled teeth could never step away from destiny. Their very body proclaimed identity. In times of stability, this reinforced continuity. In times of crisis, it trapped individuals in systems that might be crumbling. Even as reservoirs fouled and dynasties faltered, the marks of beauty endured. To modern eyes, cranial deformation and dental inlays may seem extreme, but they remind us that all societies shape bodies to reflect ideals, whether through clothing, fitness, or fashion. For the Maya, the stakes were higher. Beauty was not preference, but necessity, proof that elites were more than human echoes of gods walking the earth. Thus, the legacy of Maya beauty is not only in stone temples, but in bones and teeth unearthed centuries later. They speak of a civilization where art and identity fused, where power was inscribed on bodies, where even a smile could glitter with divine authority, but splendor could not halt decline. As the 9th century approached, jeweled smiles and reshaped skulls looked out over cities already straining under drought, soil, exhaustion, and political fragmentation. No ornament, however dazzling, could stop the unraveling that loomed ahead. In February of the year 822, masons at Copán began work on a monument that was meant to glorify the city's 17th ruler. Like those who came before him, he sought to secure his place in eternity by carving his reign into stone. The altar was circular, its surface inscribed with images of gods and glyphs announcing his authority. On its front face, the artistry was complete, clear, proud, confident. But when archaeologists turned the monument centuries later, they found something jarring. The back face was unfinished. The glyphs trailed off into blank stone. The carvers had stopped abruptly, their work abandoned. That incomplete altar is one of the starkest symbols of the Maya collapse. It shows in physical form a dynasty running out of breath. Copán had once been one of the jewels of the Maya world. Its kings raised stairways lined with thousands of glyphs, constructed temples that soared above the canopy, and presided over rituals that linked cosmos to city. But by the early 9th century, pressures mounted. Population growth strained food supplies, reservoirs fouled wars, drained resources. The 17th king inherited a kingdom already fragile. His altar left unfinished marks the moment when continuity itself faltered. The symbolism is powerful. For centuries, Maya rulers proclaimed divine sanction by raising monuments. Each stela, each altar, was a contract with their people, proof that they still held cosmic favor. To leave one unfinished was to break that contract. Perhaps laborers fled, unable to sustain the work. Perhaps resources dried up, or wars pulled men from quarries. Whatever the cause, the result was a monument frozen in mid-thought, a dynasty's voice cut short. Archaeologists find echoes of this across the Maya lowlands. Stelae once erected annually suddenly cease. Building projects halt mid-construction. Elaborate burials vanish, replaced by simpler graves. These signs do not speak of sudden destruction, but of a slow unraveling. Cities that once pulsed with tens of thousands emptied their plazas, falling silent, their stairways overgrown. The unfinished altar at Copán stands as the physical punctuation mark in this story, the visible moment when order slipped into decline. Yet collapse was not uniform. While Copán faltered, other cities still held on, and in the northern Yucatan, new powers, like Chichén Itzá, began to rise. The classic collapse was thus less an extinction than a transformation, a shifting of centers. But in the southern lowlands where Copán stood, the silence grew heavy. The unfinished altar hints at an administration that could no longer command the labor of its people, no longer rally the belief that rulers mediated between gods and humans. For the farmers of Copán, the signs must have been ominous. Once kings promised water and fertility. Once they bled in plazas to assure cosmic balance. But as reservoirs fouled and harvests shrank, faith wavered. To see an altar left incomplete was to see divine power falter. The system had demanded belief, and now the evidence of failure was carved into stone. Modern scholars debate the exact sequence of causes: drought, overfarming, warfare, contagion. But all agree that by the late 9th century, the southern cities were emptying. Temples stood abandoned glyphs, uncarved altars, unfinished. The collapse was not a single day or year, but a generational unraveling. Families left fields untended, migrated north or dispersed into forests. Dynasties ended not with final battles, but with silence. The unfinished altar of Copán is thus both artifact and metaphor. It is the frozen moment when ambition met limitation, when a civilization that had mastered time and stone found itself running out of both. Standing before it today, one feels the weight of that silence, the chisel's last stroke. The quarry abandoned, the ceremony never held. The stone whispers not of triumph, but of fragility. Collapse in the southern lowlands did not mean the end of Maya civilization. While Copán and Tikal dimmed, new centers rose in the north, most famously Chichén Itzá on the Yucatan Peninsula. By the 10th century, the city had become a beacon of power, drawing pilgrims, traders, and warriors from across Mesoamerica. Its architecture signaled continuity with the classic world, but also change. The Great Pyramid, known today as El Castillo, stood at its heart, a temple dedicated to Kukulkan, the feathered serpent deity. Beneath its outer shell, archaeologists discovered earlier pyramids, smaller cores wrapped within like nesting dolls. Each layer reflected an era, a rebuilding of faith and authority. a city remade, as the old order elsewhere crumbled. Chichén Itzá's rise showed that collapse was not extinction, but transformation. Populations that had fled drought-stricken regions or failing dynasties found new homes in the north. The Yucatan, with its cenotes, providing reliable water, offered resilience. Trade routes shifted, bringing obsidian, jade, cacao, and even copper into its markets. Merchants and pilgrims moved along causeways that connected far reaches of the peninsula. Where Copán's altar was left unfinished, Chichén's pyramid soared higher, proclaiming that the gods still favored those who could adapt. Yet the ideology that underpinned this new florescence intensified rather than softened. Ritual bloodletting continued, but public sacrifices grew more prominent. Carvings depict bound captives warriors in feathered headdresses and skull racks where the dead were displayed. The ball court at Chichén Itzá, the largest in Mesoamerica, carried acoustics so perfect that a whisper at one end could be heard at the other. In its walls are carvings of decapitated players, their necks sprouting serpents and flowers, a vision of sacrifice as renewal. Here the ball game was not just mythic theatre. It was a stage for death itself. The city's architecture reinforced this spectacle. Platforms for skull racks, columns carved with warriors, and murals of battles lined public spaces. The Temple of the Warriors, with its 1,000 columns, evoked military might as much as spiritual devotion. Pilgrims arriving at Chichén Itzá encountered not only grandeur, but also intimidation, a reminder that cosmic order rested on sacrifice and conquest. This intensification may reflect the pressures of a world after collapse. The southern lowlands had shown how fragile dynasties could be. In response, Chichén's rulers doubled down on spectacle, ensuring that no one doubted their link to divine power. By staging public rituals on unprecedented scale, they transformed religion into mass politics. Thousands could watch sacrifices at cenotes, hear the echoes of ball games, and witness rulers shedding blood before the gods. The message was unmistakable. Survival depended on faith, faith depended on rulers, and rulers proved themselves through sacrifice. Yet beneath the grandeur lay continuity of struggle. Water still shaped destiny. The sacred cenote at Chichén, a natural sinkhole, became both lifeline and altar. Divers have found remains of more than 200 men, women, and children cast into its depths alongside gold, jade, and pottery. Each offering was a plea to the gods for rain, fertility, or favor. The cenote was not only a well but a portal to the underworld, a place where human and divine worlds touched. In times of crisis, its waters received more bodies, more treasures, more desperate prayers. Chichén Itzá flourished for centuries, a symbol of resilience after collapse. But its brilliance carried the same paradox as its predecessors. Stability purchased through spectacle, survival balanced on belief. Its pyramids stand today not only as monuments to ingenuity, but as reminders of a society that responded to crisis by intensifying devotion, binding community more tightly to ritual, even when that ritual demanded blood. At Chichén Itzá, the ball game reached its most dramatic and deadly form. Ball courts had been part of Maya life for centuries, echoing the myth of the hero twins who defeated the lords of the underworld by playing and winning in Xibalba itself. But in this new age, after the collapse of the southern cities, the game became more than myth reenacted. It became a spectacle of sacrifice. The Great Ball Court of Chichén Itzá is the largest ever built, nearly 550 feet long, with walls rising 26 feet high. Stone rings carved with serpents jutted from either side. The acoustics are uncanny. A whisper at one end carries clearly to the other, as if the court itself were designed to amplify voices of priests and rulers. Imagine standing there, the echo of rubber balls thudding against stone, the roar of thousands gathered in the stands, the tension as warriors struggled to strike the heavy ball with only hips, elbows, or knees. But this was not sport in the modern sense. It was ritual combat, a sacred drama with life and death stakes. In some games, captives were forced to play their defeat, sealing their fate. In others, elite warriors competed with losers, or sometimes winners, offered as sacrifices. Carvings along the court depict players' decapitated blood streaming from their necks as serpents and plants sprout, symbolizing life renewed through death. The message was unambiguous: sacrifice was not an end but a transformation, a gift that fertilized the cosmos. The aftermath of the game often led to the Zompantli, the skull rack. Here, rows of skulls carved in stone, and sometimes placed in reality, displayed the dead. It was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. For commoners, seeing enemies' heads lined up was reassurance that their rulers commanded divine favor. For rivals, it was a warning etched in bone: resist, and your fate will be displayed for all to see. These rituals blurred the line between entertainment and religion. To the Maya, the ball game was not a pastime, but a cosmic reenactment. Each bounce of the ball symbolized celestial movements, each goal a victory in the eternal struggle between life and death. When a player was sacrificed, the act was framed not as cruelty, but as transcendence. Their blood watered the earth, their spirit fed the gods, their death ensured the community's survival. The scale of these events at Chichén Itzá suggests mass participation. Pilgrims likely traveled miles to witness the ceremonies. Merchants, nobles, and farmers alike crowded the plazas, uniting in shared spectacle. The game became a tool of governance, binding diverse groups to the city through awe and fear. Rulers leveraged this power staging rituals that dwarfed anything seen before. In the wake of southern collapse, Chichén Itzá secured legitimacy not by modest ceremonies, but by grand spectacles of blood. The murals of the ball court capture this vividly. One panel shows a decapitated player from whose neck serpents spring. Flowers bloom alongside them, a vision of fertility born from sacrifice. Another shows warriors preparing captives for ritual. These images reinforced what the crowd already knew. Death in the game was no defeat, but a cosmic offering. By participating even as spectators, everyone shared in renewing the world. Yet one cannot ignore the undercurrent of fear. For the captives forced to play the court was no myth but a final stage. For rivals defeated in war, the game was humiliation before death. For commoners, it was a reminder that their rulers commanded life and death as surely as the gods. The ball game bound society together, but it also underscored the costs of obedience. At Chichén Itzá, the ball court was not just a monument of stone, but of ideology. It told the world that the city stood at the center of cosmic struggle, that its rulers mediated life and death, that sacrifice sustained the universe. The echoes of balls and voices in its walls were not only sounds of ritual, they were reminders that belief itself was the foundation of survival. The sacred cenote of Chichén Itzá stands as one of the most haunting reminders of Maya devotion. A natural sinkhole nearly 200 feet across its sheer limestone walls descend into dark green waters that once shimmered with offerings. To the Maya, it was far more than a well. It was a portal to the underworld, a place where prayers could pass into the realm of gods, and into its depths they cast treasures and lives. When archaeologists first dredged the cenote in the early 20th century, they pulled up gold discs, jade beads, obsidian blades, and ceramic vessels. But soon they found something more chilling human bones. Over 200 individuals had been sacrificed here, men, women, and children alike. Their remains mixed with artifacts told of centuries of offerings, each plunge into the waters, a desperate plea for rain, fertility, or cosmic balance. The timing of these sacrifices often coincided with moments of crisis. Drought, famine, or political upheaval drove rulers to intensify devotion. Throwing captives, attendants, or even children into the cenote was framed as bargaining with the gods. The gods gave rain. In return, the people gave life. In times of plenty, offerings of jade or gold sufficed. But when skies stayed dry, human lives became the most potent currency. For the crowds who gathered at the cenote's edge, these rituals must have been overwhelming. Imagine standing among thousands incense thick in the air drums echoing across the plaza. Priests painted in blue led captives forward, their cries swallowed by the roar of onlookers. One by one, bodies tumbled into the depths. The splash reverberated against the limestone walls, a sound both final and sacred. In that moment, the community believed they had given what the gods demanded. Divers, exploring the cenote in modern times, discovered bones of children as young as 6, their small skeletons tangled among artifacts. Some showed trauma, others not, suggesting that some may have been thrown alive, others killed beforehand. Adults too were present, many likely war captives or chosen attendants. Together they formed a congregation in death, suspended in the cenote's silent water for centuries. The cenote was not only a site of sacrifice, but also of pilgrimage. Travelers came from across the peninsula to offer gifts. The road leading to it, the Sakbi, was paved with stone, lined with altars. To reach the cenote was to enter a sacred landscape where every step prepared the pilgrim to encounter the divine. At its edge, prayers rose with smoke, while treasures and lives sank into the abyss. This practice reflected a worldview in which nature and divinity were inseparable. Rain was not simply weather, but a gift from Chark, the storm god. Water was not merely a resource, but a manifestation of sacred order. To throw offerings into the cenote was to restore balance, to ensure that crops would grow and families would survive. It was a logic of reciprocity. The gods gave life, humans returned it. Yet the cenote also revealed the weight of fear. Each drought was a crisis not just of survival, but of legitimacy. Rulers were judged by their ability to intercede with the gods. When rains failed, the pressure to offer more grew immense. Sacrifices at the cenote were thus both spiritual acts and political necessities, binding the community in shared spectacle, while reaffirming the ruler's role as mediator between heaven and earth. Standing at its rim today, one feels the gravity of that history. The water is still reflecting sky and forest, but beneath lies a silent archive of desperation and devotion. The cenote absorbed centuries of hopes, fears, and bodies, preserving them as testament to the lengths a civilization would go to maintain balance in a fragile world. While kings bled in plazas and captives were cast into cenotes, the vast majority of Maya people lived lives of work, family, and faith that seldom appear in carved glyphs. Their daily existence sustained the grandeur of temples and rituals. Without farmers, artisans, and market traders, no dynasty could have thrived. To understand Maya civilization fully, we must step away from palaces and imagine the hum of ordinary days. Most Maya families lived in small compounds of thatched houses arranged around courtyards. Walls were woven from reeds and plastered with mud roofs steeply pitched to shed rain. Inside, low platforms served as beds, with mats rolled out at night. Fire hearths burned constantly, filling the air with smoke that deterred insects. Life began at dawn, with roosters crowing and the day's first tortillas pressed from maize. Maize was not merely food, it was identity. In the Popol Vuh, humans were fashioned from maize dough. To eat was to reaffirm one's essence as people of corn. Fields lay just beyond the compounds. Farmers planted milpa plots, rotating maize beans and squash in cycles that nourished soil and stomach alike. With stone tools and wooden digging sticks, they cleared jungle patches, burned brush, and sowed seeds. Women tended kitchen gardens heavy with chili, cacao, and herbs. Children fetched water, carried firewood, and scared birds from crops. Each family's labor sustained not only themselves, but the tribute demanded by nobles, bundles of maize, cotton cloth, or crafted goods delivered to urban centers. Markets provided variety beyond subsistence. In larger cities, plazas bustled with vendors trading salt, Obsidian blades, dried fish, honey, cacao beans, and colorful feathers. Cacao beans served as currency exchanged for food or goods. Merchants traveled long distances, connecting coastal salt flats, highland obsidian quarries, and jungle cacao groves. These networks stitched the Maya world together, spreading not just goods, but ideas and styles. A farmer from a small hamlet might taste fish from the coast or wear beads quarried hundreds of miles away, tangible links to distant lands. Craft specialization flourished alongside farming. Potters shaped jars and bowls, some plain for cooking, others painted with intricate designs of gods and heroes. Weavers spun cotton into fine textiles dyed with indigo or cochineal, their patterns signaling identity and status. Obsidian knappers crafted razor-sharp tools and weapons, exchanging them across regions. These artisans often worked in workshops tied to noble households, their skills valued as contributions to the prestige economy. Religion infused every level of life. Families kept household shrines where they burned incense or left offerings of food. Ancestors were honored in burials beneath house floors, linking the living to the dead. Festivals punctuated the year tied to planting and harvest. Drums, dances, and processions filled villages with sound and color, bringing cosmic cycles into everyday rhythm. In these gatherings, commoners participated directly in sustaining cosmic balance, offering prayers, dances, and songs, alongside the more dramatic rituals of nobles. Gender roles were structured but not rigid. Men farmed, built, and went to war. Women ground maize, cooked, wove, and managed households. Yet evidence also points to women serving as healers, midwives, scribes, and in rare cases warriors. The skeletal remains of the young woman in Copán remind us that gender roles could bend under certain circumstances. Daily life was practical, but it also carried space for flexibility when necessity or opportunity demanded. Children grew into these roles gradually. From a young age, boys followed fathers to fields while girls watched mothers weave. Games trained skills, rubber balls for coordination, miniature weapons for play hunting. Education was informal, but constant, embedded in work and ritual. Only scribal families trained children in glyphs and codices, passing on literacy as a privilege of elite households. Life for commoners was hard. Famines came when rains failed. Tribute demands weighed heavily, requiring long hours of labor for kings whose rituals consumed resources, yet resilience marked their days. Families adapted, shared, and moved when needed. Their hands built temples, their food fed nobles, their songs filled plazas. Without them, the grandeur of Maya civilization would never have risen. In their simplicity lies endurance. Even when dynasties fell and temples crumbled, farmers still planted maize, women still wove cloth, children still played in courtyards. The Maya collapse did not erase these rhythms. They persisted, transformed, and carried forward into the lives of millions of descendants today. Centuries after the Maya built their greatest pyramids, science returned to the ruins with tools the ancients could never have imagined. Among these was muon imaging, a technology born from physics laboratories and particle accelerators, now repurposed for archaeology. Muons are tiny particles, created when cosmic rays strike Earth's atmosphere. They rain down constantly, passing through mountains, temples, and even our own bodies. Unlike light or X-rays, muons can penetrate thick stone, slowing or scattering when they encounter voids or chambers. By placing sensitive detectors at key points, scientists can map the unseen interiors of structures, like taking an X-ray of a pyramid built more than 1,000 years ago. At Copán, one of the most enigmatic monuments is Temple 11, a structure linked to dynastic rituals and possibly the burial of a missing king. Traditional excavation is difficult. Digging risks collapsing walls, destroying carvings, or contaminating fragile contexts. Enter muon imaging. Physicists and archaeologists teamed up hauling detectors into the jungle, setting them at strategic points and waiting. The process is painstaking. Muons are rare, and building a clear image requires months of exposure. Detectors must sit quietly in the dark, recording the faint rain of cosmic particles, while researchers endure humidity, insects, and logistical hurdles. The first scans disappointed. Shadows and noise blurred the data, suggesting no major cavities. But as techniques improved, scientists recalibrated their models, accounting for the dense limestone and irregular geometry of the pyramid. Slowly hints emerged. One dataset revealed an anomaly, a vertical shaft-like space about 5 meters long, hidden deep inside. It might be natural collapse, a void left by ancient construction, or the outline of a sealed chamber. The possibility electrified the team. If real, it could hold a royal tomb untouched since the Classic era. Imagine the implications. A confirmed royal burial beneath Temple 11 could fill gaps in Copán's dynastic record, linking inscriptions on stairways to physical remains. It could reveal regalia offerings and even inscriptions lost elsewhere. More than that, it could test theories about the role of sacrifice, gender, and power in Maya society. Was the missing king entombed there? Or, as with the woman beneath the stairway, might it hold someone who defied expectations? The promise of muon imaging is immense. Non-invasive, it allows archaeologists to peer inside without lifting a single stone. But it also has limits. The resolution is coarse, and voids can be misinterpreted. A cavity might be rubble, not a chamber. Still, the excitement lies in possibility. For a civilization that prized secrecy, where tombs were hidden beneath temples and passages sealed for eternity, muon imaging offers a new set of eyes. The arrival of particle physics in the jungle also reflects a broader truth. The Maya story continues to evolve. Each generation of archaeologists brings new tools. LiDAR to map cities hidden under forests, isotope analysis to trace origins, DNA sequencing to reveal ancestry. Muon imaging joins this arsenal, blending cutting-edge science with ancient mystery. Standing in the humid air of Copán, watching cosmic particles trace paths through stone, one feels the past and present converge. For the local communities who live near these ruins, the work carries more than academic interest. Each discovery reshapes identity, connecting modern Maya descendants with ancestors whose voices were carved in glyphs and sealed in tombs. The search for a hidden chamber is not only about kings and queens, but about continuity, heritage, and resilience. Whether or not Temple 11 conceals a royal tomb, the attempt itself matters. It shows that after 1,000 years, the Maya still command curiosity and reverence. Muons falling from the sky, silent and invisible, now serve as guides to secrets buried beneath stone. The gods of the past may not have imagined it, but their temples are once again being read, not by blood and smoke, but by physics and patience. The promise of muon imaging at Copán stirred excitement, but the deeper scientists looked, the more they encountered the confounding nature of ancient stone. Pyramids and temples are not simple solid blocks. They are layered constructions with fill tunnels and galleries hidden inside. Over centuries, earthquakes, collapses, and repairs added new complexity. To a muon detector, the difference between a chamber sealed by masons and a void created by crumbling stone can be subtle. The data that first suggested a 5-meter shaft might indeed show a tomb, or it might simply reveal a hollow left by collapse. Temple 11 embodies this uncertainty. Built to commemorate dynastic transitions, it was a place where kings performed rituals tying themselves to the cosmos. Glyphs speak of ceremonies held on its steps, offerings burned, and ancestors invoked. If a royal burial lies inside, it would anchor these inscriptions to human remains. Yet so far, scans show anomalies that could be interpreted in multiple ways. Archaeologists debate, is this the long-sought resting place of a missing king? Or is it wishful thinking imposed on ambiguous data? Tunnels dug in earlier centuries complicate matters further. Some early excavators, driven by treasure hunting, more than science, bored shafts into pyramids, leaving behind voids that later confuse modern imaging. Natural faults in limestone, too, can mimic the appearance of constructed spaces. Muon imaging, for all its promise, is not omniscient. It gives hints, shadows probabilities, but rarely certainties. Still, the potential is undeniable. Traditional excavation risks destroying what it seeks to uncover. A tunnel might destabilize walls, collapse stairways, or expose delicate offerings to air and decay. By contrast, muon imaging preserves integrity. Archaeologists can decide whether the risk of excavation is justified. If anomalies are consistent, if evidence converges, then perhaps a carefully planned dig could confirm the presence of a chamber. Until then, patience reigns. This uncertainty reflects a broader truth about archaeology. The past is never a fixed script waiting to be read. It is a puzzle of fragments, each method offering glimpses, each interpretation contested. In Copán, the hieroglyphic stairway tells of dynasties. The unfinished altar tells of collapse. The bones beneath tell of a young woman whose identity resists easy categorization. Now muons add their own chapter, whispering of spaces that may or may not conceal secrets. For the public, stories of lost tombs captivate imagination. Headlines proclaim discoveries before they are confirmed, turning anomalies into kings. But in truth, archaeology advances cautiously weighed down by the responsibility of evidence. Each false step risks not just error, but the erasure of fragile traces that survived for 1,000 years. Scientists at Copán know this well. The shaft they imagine might contain regalia bones and offerings, or it might hold nothing but rubble. Either outcome is significant, for it shapes how we understand the city's end. What remains certain is that the Maya built with deliberate symbolism. Temples were not random mounds, but cosmological models. Stairways mirrored time. Tombs lay beneath thresholds, binding rulers to divine order. If a burial lies in Temple 11, it would not be coincidence, but intention, proof of how deeply the Maya embedded their dead into living spaces. If no burial exists, then the absence too teaches us something. Perhaps memory was inscribed only in glyphs, not bodies, and so the search continues, a balance between physics and patience, between science and imagination. Muons fall silently through the jungle, night detectors click softly in the darkness, and data accumulate grain by grain. Archaeologists wait uncertain whether the images will reveal a royal resting place or an empty void. In that waiting lies the essence of the discipline curiosity, tempered by caution, reverence for what remains unseen. The search for hidden tombs at Copán sparks wonder, but the greater question remains: why did the Maya world unravel? For decades, scholars hunted for a single explanation: a killer drought, a volcanic cataclysm, a devastating war. Yet the evidence insists otherwise. The collapse was not a single blow, but a slow entanglement of stresses. Systems thinking, an approach that sees societies as webs of interdependent parts, reveals how fragile the classic Maya had become by the 9th century. At the center of this web stood agriculture. Maize beans and squash sustained millions, but fields required constant maintenance. Deforestation for farmland stripped soils, and terracing slowed but did not stop erosion. As populations grew, farmers pushed deeper into marginal lands. Yields began to plateau, even as demands for tribute rose. Reservoirs, once marvels of engineering, strained under rising use. When water quality faltered, disease spread. Each weakness might have been manageable alone. Together they created fragility. Warfare intensified the strain. Inscriptions from the late classic period show a surge in conflict. Kings who once staged bloodletting as proof of divine favor now sought legitimacy through conquest. Rivalries drew cities into cycles of attack and revenge. Wars disrupted trade, captured farmers, and redirected labor to armies rather than fields. Skulls on Zompantli proclaimed victory, but each war drained resources that could have stabilized communities. Trade routes too shifted unpredictably. The obsidian of the highlands, the cacao of the lowlands, the shells and salt of the coasts, these bound the Maya world into an economic network. But when drought struck one region or wars severed a route, shortages rippled across others. Markets grew unstable. Rulers who had promised abundance found themselves presiding over scarcity. Ideology itself, once the glue of society, became a burden. The system demanded that kings intercede with gods through blood and sacrifice. When rains failed, rulers staged ever more elaborate rituals. Yet each failure eroded faith. A king who could not summon rain risked being seen as illegitimate. Thus, political power, tied so tightly to cosmic performance, became brittle. The very mechanism that had secured authority now hastened its collapse. Seen as a whole, the classic Maya collapse was less like a building toppled by an earthquake than like a woven rope fraying strand by strand. Agriculture, warfare, trade, and ideology each strained until together they snapped. Populations plummeted, cities emptied, dynasties ended, and yet fragments endured, evolving into new forms. This system's perspective also explains why collapse was uneven. Some centers fell rapidly, others lingered. Local conditions, soil quality, trade access, political alliances shaped resilience. While Copán faltered, Chichén Itzá rose. While some reservoirs poisoned their cities, others continued to sustain life. Collapse was a mosaic, not a monolith. The lesson is profound. Civilizations are not destroyed by single causes, but by convergences. Natural events matter, but human choices amplify or cushion their effects. The Maya did not collapse because of drought alone. They collapsed because they had stretched their systems to the breaking point, leaving no margin for error when droughts, wars, and demands collided. For modern readers, this view resonates. Our own societies are webs of interdependence, food systems tied to trade networks, politics tied to ideology, resilience tied to environment. The Maya remind us that when multiple stresses converge, even great civilizations can falter. Collapse need not come with fire and conquest. It can arrive quietly as people leave fields, cities empty, and monuments fall silent. The Maya collapse, then, was not mystery but inevitability once thresholds were crossed. It teaches that resilience depends not only on ingenuity, but on humility before nature's limits. The unfinished altar of Copán and the abandoned fields of Tikal stand as warnings carved in stone, and soil brilliance cannot shield against fragility forever. The lakes that ring the Maya lowlands preserve a record more impartial than any king's inscription. In their sediments lies the memory of farming abandonment and collapse, traced through the chemistry of nitrogen. For centuries, these cores show high levels evidence of dense populations clearing forests, burning fields, and cultivating maize. Each year, runoff washed nitrogen-rich soil into the lakes, layering proof of human labor at astonishing scale. The Maya reshaped their landscape so thoroughly that even mud at the bottom of a lake bore testimony to their industry. Then suddenly the pattern shifts. Around the late 9th century, nitrogen levels fall off a cliff. Within decades, readings plummet to lows not seen since before cities like Tikal and Copán had risen. The interpretation is stark. Farms were abandoned, soils lay fallow, and forests returned. People were leaving not just in small groups, but in waves. Temples that once oversaw tens of thousands now looked out on silence. The collapse left a chemical scar that modern scientists can still read 1,000 years later. What makes this nitrogen drop so revealing is how closely it aligns with other evidence. Archaeological surveys show stelae no longer erected after the 802nd. Palaces fall into disrepair. Inscriptions cease. Populations shrink. The lakes confirm what the stones suggest: the social order broke down, and with it the agricultural machine that had sustained it. Collapse was not abstract. It was visible in every empty field, every reservoir choked with weeds, every child who grew up elsewhere because the city could no longer feed them. But the data also offers nuance. The fall in nitrogen was not uniform across all regions. Some lakes show sharper drops, others more gradual. This mirrors the uneven nature of collapse. Some cities fell quickly, others lingered. Some farmers abandoned land entirely, others shifted to smaller plots. Collapse was a process, not an instant, and the lakes allow us to trace its rhythm with surprising precision. Even after the sharp decline, traces of nitrogen never vanish completely. They flatten at low levels, evidence that some communities endured. The Maya did not disappear. Families continued to farm, villages persisted, new centers emerged. What collapsed was not a people, but a political and ecological system too fragile to sustain its scale. This distinction matters. It reminds us that collapse is less about extinction and more about transformation. Still, the suddenness of the nitrogen plunge is sobering. For generations, the Maya sustained high agricultural output, maintaining resilience through terracing reservoirs and crop rotations. But once thresholds were crossed, soils, depleted reservoirs fouled political legitimacy, frayed the system, unraveled swiftly. It suggests that even advanced civilizations can appear stable until the very moment they are not, when a single decade tips centuries of balance into irreversible decline. Archaeologists now view these nitrogen records as crucial evidence bridging natural science and human history. They allow us to measure not just what rulers claimed, but what common farmers did. They confirm that the collapse was as much about empty fields as about abandoned temples, as much about missing maize as missing kings. The heartbeat of the civilization faltered, and the lakes recorded the silence. The story is humbling. It shows how tightly human life is bound to soil, water, and climate. The Maya, with their brilliance in astronomy and architecture, still depended on the fertility of Earth. When that fertility waned, their political order dissolved. The nitrogen drop is a reminder that civilizations rest not only on ideas or monuments, but on the thin layer of soil that feeds us all. The role of the historical script writing assistant is to ensure plain text output to exactly 5000 characters. Excluding spaces, no titles, no sound cues, no YouTube policy violation optimized for 11 Labs Voice US. Tone maintained, even as southern cities like Copán and Tikal fell silent echoes of Maya brilliance reverberated into the post-classic era. Power shifted northward, where Chichén Itzá flourished as a new kind of capital. Unlike the dynasties of the classic age that rose and fell on single lineages, Chichén's leadership seems to have been more collective, perhaps shared among councils of nobles and warrior elites. This adaptation reflected lessons learned from collapsed stability required broader participation, or at least the appearance of it. The city drew strength from diversity, pulling together traditions from across Mesoamerica and weaving them into something distinctly its own. Architecture signaled this shift. El Castillo, the pyramid of Kukulkan, not only honored the feathered serpent deity, but also functioned as a cosmic calendar. Each equinox, the setting sun cast a serpent-shaped shadow down its stairway, a spectacle that drew pilgrims in awe. Such precision showed continuity with classic traditions of astronomy, but on a scale that emphasized mass gatherings, where Copán's altars proclaimed dynastic memory, to select elites Chichén pyramid performed cosmic theater for thousands. Trade routes coursed through the city, salt from coastal flats, cacao from lowland groves, copper from western Mexico, and obsidian from highland quarries, all converged here. Chichén Itzá's markets thrived, binding together regions that had once looked to southern centers. The city's prosperity depended not only on its temples, but also on its role as a hub of exchange. Merchants, warriors, and pilgrims alike found reasons to come, and in their mingling, Chichén became a cosmopolitan capital. But the city's stability was not maintained by commerce alone. Ritual spectacle intensified. reminding everyone that divine power still demanded blood. The sacred cenote became the most famous site of these offerings, swallowing treasures and lives alike. Warriors were central to this order, their victories displayed in carvings that lined temples. Unlike the classic emphasis on dynastic continuity, post-classic rule leaned more heavily on military imagery. Authority rested not only on lineage, but on the ability to capture captive stage rituals and broadcast strength through spectacle. These changes illustrate continuity and transformation. Collapse had not destroyed Maya culture, it had reshaped it. New centers rose where conditions allowed, adopting fresh political forms while preserving core beliefs. The ballgame continued, sacrifice endured astronomy, guided rituals, and maize remained the heart of daily life. Yet governance shifted, trade networks reoriented, and architecture spoke to broader audiences. To walk through Chichén Itzá today is to see this blend. The Temple of the Warriors, lined with columns, presents rows of stone figures, each bearing weapons or banners. Murals depict battles, marches, and offerings, underscoring a society where martial power intertwined with ritual authority. The Tsompantli, or skull rack, stands nearby, a stone tableau of heads, reminding all who entered that cosmic order was maintained through sacrifice. Pilgrims approaching the sacred cenote encountered not only water, but also the weight of centuries of devotion, where throwing jade beads, or even children, into its depths promised rain and prosperity. In this post-classic order, spectacle was not optional. It was the glue that bound a diverse and shifting society. Collapse had taught that belief could fray, that dynasties could crumble. To counter this, Chichén Itzá and its successors doubled down on ritual theater, ensuring that no one could doubt their place in the cosmos. It was resilience through performance stability, purchased by all. Yet even this new order was temporary. By the 13th century, Chichén Itzá too waned, replaced by other centers like Mayapan. The pattern repeated: rise, flourish, falter, and shift. Through it all, the Maya endured their traditions, evolving but never extinguished. The post-classic was less a coda than a reinvention, a testament to adaptability in the face of collapse. When Spanish ships first touched the shores of Mesoamerica in 1519, they entered a world still shaped by Maya traditions, though transformed by centuries of change. In the central highlands, the conquistador Hernán Cortés encountered the Aztec Empire, but to the east and south stretched territories held by Maya, polities independent, fractious, and resilient. Unlike the Aztecs, the Maya were not unified under a single crown. Dozens of small kingdoms ruled the Yucatan, and beyond each, with its own nobles, warriors, and rituals. This fragmentation made them difficult to conquer quickly, for even as one city fell, others resisted. The Spaniards brought with them steel swords, muskets, crossbows, and war horses, tools that overwhelmed warriors armed with obsidian blades and wooden shields. Even more deadly was disease. Smallpox, measles, and influenza spread faster than armies, decimating populations who had no immunity. Entire communities weakened before battles began. Yet the Maya did not yield easily. For decades after the fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521, Spanish forces struggled to subdue the jungles and coasts of the Maya world. Accounts describe fierce resistance. Maya warriors fought ambush battles in forests, using knowledge of terrain to offset Spanish firepower. Cities rose in revolt after supposedly submitting. Nobles fled deeper into forests, re-establishing communities beyond Spanish reach. Unlike the rapid conquest of the Aztec capital, the conquest of the Maya was a protracted struggle more than a century long. Ritual life continued even in resistance. Spanish friars wrote of sacrifices still performed in secret idols, hidden away in caves, and rituals carried on, despite official bans. Christianity spread, but it blended with Maya traditions, creating syncretic practices that endured. Villages honored saints whose festivals echoed older deities. Crosses were raised, but their symbolism often fused with beliefs in world trees, connecting heaven, earth, and underworld. The Maya adapted, resisting not only with arms, but with culture. Still, the Spanish advance was relentless. By the mid-16th century, most of the Yucatan was under colonial control. Towns were reorganized, forced labor, demanded tribute extracted. Churches rose, where temples once stood, often built from the very stones of pyramids. Yet pockets of independence remained. Deep in the forests of Petén Maya, polities like the Itzá still held strong ruling from their island capital of Tayasal on Lake Chichén Itzá. For generations they resisted Spanish attempts at conversion and subjugation. The clash between Spaniards and Maya was not only military but ideological. To the Spanish, sacrifices and idols were evidence of paganism to be destroyed. To the Maya, Spanish demands for submission threatened cosmic order itself. Resistance then was not merely political but spiritual, a defense of balance between gods and humans. Each battle was fought not just with weapons but with worldviews. Thus, the conquest of the Maya stretched far longer than that of the Aztecs. From the first encounters in the early 1500s to the final siege in 1697, nearly 2 centuries passed. This endurance reveals the tenacity of Maya communities and the challenges of subduing a decentralized, resilient people spread across difficult terrain. The arrival of invaders did not end Maya history. It began a new chapter in one of survival under colonial rule, adaptation in faith, and quiet defiance in culture. Temples fell, but memories endured. Languages persisted, spoken in households and markets. Rituals survived, woven into Christian calendars. The conquest marked catastrophe, but not erasure. The final act of the Spanish conquest of the Maya came not in the 1500s, but at the end of the 1600s, nearly 2 centuries after Cortés first landed on the Mexican coast. Deep in the forests of Petén, in what is now northern Guatemala, the Itzá Maya held out in their island capital of Petén, known today as Flores. Surrounded by the waters of Lake Chichén Itzá, their city stood as a living remnant of the classic world. Temples rose above narrow streets, rituals honored gods, both old and adapted, and warriors defended the last bastion of independence. For decades, Spanish governors and friars tried diplomacy. Missionaries arrived to preach Christianity, sometimes welcomed, sometimes expelled. Traders moved cautiously across frontiers, exchanging goods but also carrying rumors. Each attempt to convert the Itzá ended in failure, often with friars killed or driven away. The Itzá knew what had happened elsewhere. Submission meant temples destroyed, idols burned, and freedom lost. They held their ground, an island kingdom of defiance. By the late 17th century, Spain's patience had worn thin. Determined to end resistance, colonial authorities in Guatemala and Yucatan planned a final assault. In early 1697, Spanish forces marched through dense forest, hauling cannons and muskets across terrain that seemed to swallow armies. From the east, brigantines advanced across Lake Chichén Itzá, their sails catching wind unfamiliar to Maya eyes. The siege of Petén had begun. Contemporary accounts describe the clash as brutal. Cannon fire thundered across the lake, striking temples that had stood for centuries. Warriors in canoes fought, desperately hurling spears and arrows against armored soldiers. But steel, gunpowder, and crossbows cut them down. The battle raged until Spanish troops stormed the island, setting fire to homes, pulling down idols, and seizing survivors. Chroniclers wrote that the waters of the lake turned red with blood. The last independent Maya capital had fallen. With the conquest of Petén in 1697, Spain declared victory at last. Temples were razed, their stones repurposed into churches. Crosses rose where pyramids had stood. Survivors were baptized, their leaders executed or absorbed into colonial order. The long arc of independent Maya rule, stretching back 3 millennia, ended in flames and gunpowder. Yet conquest was never total. Even as Spain claimed dominance, Maya families carried traditions into forests, mountains, and villages. Rituals continued. In caves, offerings left at sacred springs, prayers whispered in languages the Spaniards could not suppress. Resistance endured in subtler forms through memory and culture. The fall of Nochpetén was an ending for one political order, but not for a people. For the Spaniards, the conquest of 1697 was triumph, the final pacification of a region long defiant. For the Maya, it was catastrophe, a violent rupture layered atop centuries of resilience. The lake that reflected temples now reflected churches, but beneath its waters lay echoes of resistance, voices of those who had fought to the last. The siege of Flores stands as a reminder that empires may conquer cities, but they rarely conquer identity. The Maya world, though politically subdued, remained culturally alive. Languages, customs, and beliefs flowed forward, carried by generations who refused to let memory die. The fall of Nochpetén in 1697 closed one chapter of Maya history, but it did not extinguish the people themselves. Today, more than 6 million Maya live across Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, El Salvador, and southern Mexico. They speak over 24 languages descended from ancient tongues, weave textiles rich with ancestral symbols, and carry forward traditions rooted in a civilization that endured conquest, collapse, and colonization. Survival became its own act of defiance, a quiet but unbroken line from the classic world to the present. Colonial rule sought to erase them. Spanish friars burned codices, precious books of bark paper that held centuries of knowledge. Temples were toppled, idols smashed, and rituals outlawed. Yet beneath these layers of suppression, Maya life persisted. Families continued to plant maize, still seen as sacred essence. Women wove huipil's garments, embroidered with cosmological patterns, passed down through generations. In villages, elders taught myths of the hero twins, sometimes cloaked in Christian language to shield them from inquisitors' eyes. Faith bent, but did not break. Syncretism became a shield. Catholic saints absorbed the roles of older gods. Processions on feast days echoed ancient festivals with drums and dances that missionaries mistook for simple celebration. Crosses planted in village centers sometimes represented not only Christianity, but also the world tree, the axis connecting heaven, earth, and underworld. The result was a layered faith part, European part, indigenous, entirely Maya. Through it, communities preserved identity, while outwardly conforming to colonial demands. Language proved another bastion. Though Spanish spread Maya, tongues endured in homes, markets, and rituals. Each language carried unique histories, oral traditions, and ways of framing the world. They were living archives that no friar's fire could erase. Even today, Kich, Yucatec Kakchikal Quechchi, and others remain spoken by millions, ensuring continuity unbroken by centuries of domination. Resistance also took political forms. Uprisings erupted periodically from colonial times through independence and beyond. The caste war of the 19th century, waged in Yucatan, saw Maya rebels carve out autonomous regions for decades, defying both Mexican and European powers. In Guatemala, Maya communities resisted forced labor and land seizures well into the 20th century. These struggles echoed the same resilience that had kept the Itzá unconquered until 1697. Modern science, too, has played a role in rediscovery. Archaeologists work alongside Maya descendants, uncovering temples and tombs not as relics of a vanished people, but as evidence of living heritage. Festivals at ruins blend academic study with community memory. The bones unearthed in Copán, the glyphs deciphered in Palenque, the nitrogen traced in lake cores, all speak not of strangers, but of ancestors whose voices still resonate. For the Maya today, survival is not merely endurance, but assertion. Textiles, stories, rituals, and languages proclaim presence in a world that once declared them lost. The word collapse, used so often in textbooks, fails to capture this continuity. Dynasties may have fallen, cities may have emptied, but identity endured, adapting and transforming. To walk through a modern Maya village is to see this resilience alive. Children run in courtyards, much like their ancestors did. Women grind maize on stone metates, shaping tortillas as countless generations before them. Men farm plots of corn and beans, their labor echoing ancient milpas. In markets, voices rise in Maya languages, selling cacao salt and textiles woven in patterns that trace back 1,000 years. Every act, every word, every stitch is a quiet rebuttal to the notion of disappearance. The Maya remind us that conquest destroys monuments, but not memory. Their civilization remains one of the longest continuous traditions in human history. From temples to villages, from glyphs to languages, from collapse to survival, they endure. The role of rulers ended at Flores, but the role of the people never ceased. To understand the Maya, archaeologists have learned that no single line of evidence can suffice. Stones tell one story, bones another, sediments a third. Only by weaving them together can we glimpse the complexity of a civilization that spanned 3 millennia. At Copán, inscriptions record dynasties of kings, yet beneath stairways lie burials that challenge those narratives. At Palenque, carved panels proclaim victories, but isotopes in skeletons reveal migrations and foreign brides. At Tikal, reservoirs speak silently through layers of clay and volcanic minerals, showing that kings managed not only ritual but water. Every fragment is partial. Together they form a chorus. One of the most powerful convergences comes from the dialogue between epigraphy and paleoecology. Hieroglyphs record dates of battles, coronations, and rituals, often linked to rulers' claims of divine favor. But lake cores, with their chemical traces of farming, show when those claims rang hollow. Inscriptions might boast of fertility and abundance, yet nitrogen drops reveal abandonment. The contrast reminds us that history carved by rulers was as much performance as fact. The soil, by contrast, cannot lie. Similarly, tombs add nuance. The young woman beneath Copán's stairway was buried among sacrificed men and mercury pools. Her bones suggest she was foreign. Her fracture hints at combat. She does not appear in texts, yet her presence alters our understanding of power, gender, and ritual. Without osteology, she would remain invisible. Without texts, we might misinterpret her entirely. Only by combining both do we begin to see the contours of her story. Artifacts, too, add voices. Pottery fragments link trade routes across hundreds of miles. Jade beads reveal quarry sites in distant mountains. Obsidian blades, when traced chemically, map exchange networks that bound highlands and lowlands together. These objects speak of interdependence, showing that collapse was not only political, but economic, the fraying of ties that once connected a vast region. Science adds further dimensions. Muon imaging reveals possible voids in temples. LiDAR uncovers cities hidden beneath forests. DNA analysis links ancient remains to modern communities. Each method peels back another layer, but also adds complexity. Discoveries rarely confirm simple stories. More often they complicate them, showing that the Maya were neither noble saints nor doomed victims, but people negotiating choices, risks, and beliefs across centuries. The convergence of evidence also teaches humility. Early explorers once described the Maya as a lost civilization, their cities swallowed by jungle. Today we know they were never lost. Their descendants live across Mesoamerica, their languages spoken by millions. Stones misled because they seemed silent, but paired with science, with oral traditions, with living culture, they speak again. At Copán, lake sediments confirm that farming collapsed just as monuments ceased. At Chichén Itzá, offerings in the cenote align with evidence of drought, showing that rituals intensified in times of stress. At Palenque, inscriptions of Pakal's triumphs contrast with skeletal signs of malnutrition in commoners. The combination does not diminish their civilization. It deepens our appreciation of its struggles and achievements. In this way, the Maya remind us that history is never one voice, but many. A stela proclaims glory, but a skeleton whispers pain. A glyph praises abundance, but a lake testifies to decline. A tomb sealed in darkness holds contradictions that no inscription could acknowledge. Only when these sources are read together do we see the Maya not as myth, but as humanity, in full, ambitious, ingenious, fragile, enduring. The search continues. Each excavation, each core, each scan adds another thread to the tapestry. The story is not finished, and perhaps it never will be. But that is the power of convergence. The more voices we hear, the closer we come to truth. The Maya, long caricatured as vanished, instead emerge as complex and resilient, their story unfolding still in stone, soil, and memory. Archaeologists often dream of the one find that could shift an entire field. For the Maya, that dream is a sealed royal tomb at Copán, untouched by looters, complete with regalia and inscriptions. Such a discovery would not only illuminate the life of a single ruler, but also clarify gaps in dynastic history. The hieroglyphic stairway records names and dates, yet some remain uncertain. A confirmed burial with regalia could anchor those records in flesh and bone, linking inscription to individual text to body. If such a tomb were found beneath Temple 11, it could resolve long-standing questions about succession. Did the 17th ruler of Copán preside over a fading dynasty alone, or was there a hidden co-ruler whose memory was erased? Was the young woman buried under the stairway, a queen in her own right, or a captive sacrificed for cosmic Parb? Theatre, a royal burial, might contain glyphic texts, jade ornaments carved with names or murals that shed light on forgotten chapters. Every artifact could be a clue, every offering a thread in the tapestry of Maya collapse. Beyond dynastic puzzles, the contents of such a tomb could deepen our understanding of ritual practice. Mercury traces might reveal symbolic waters, jade mosaics, the artistry of elite craftsmen, skeletal remains, the health and origins of rulers. Isotope analysis could track where the king was born, what foods he ate, whether he traveled far from Copán. DNA could link him to modern Maya communities, drawing a line of continuity across 1,000 years. Even botanical remains, seeds, flowers, incense, could reconstruct ceremonies staged at his burial. The chamber would be a time capsule, a snapshot of belief at the threshold of collapse. For Maya descendants, such a find would carry profound meaning. It would not be the unearthing of a stranger, but the return of an ancestor. How archaeologists approach such discoveries now requires collaboration with local communities, ensuring respect for cultural heritage. Scientific analysis and cultural reverence must move hand in hand. The tomb would not only serve scholars, but also strengthen identity for millions who still speak. Maya languages wear woven symbols and carry traditions forward. Yet caution tempers the dream. Many supposed lost tombs have turned out to be rubble or looted chambers. Muon imaging may hint at voids, but interpretation is fraught. Excavation risks damaging fragile contexts, sealed for over a millennium. And even if a tomb exists, it may not hold the answers we expect. History rarely yields neat resolutions. Instead, it complicates, forcing us to question assumptions and embrace ambiguity. Still, the allure persists. Archaeologists know that a single intact burial could reshape understanding of collapse. If offerings dated precisely to the 9th century, we could confirm whether rulers turned to new rituals as crises mounted. If skeletal evidence showed malnutrition or illness, we could trace the human toll of environmental strain. If inscriptions within invoked gods of rain or war, we could see how ideology adapted in the face of decline. Each possibility adds weight to the dream of discovery. Ultimately, the hunt for a royal tomb is less about treasure than about truth. It is the search for a voice that might speak across centuries, bridging carved stairways, nitrogen in lake beds, and bones beneath altars. Whether or not Temple 11 conceals such a chamber, the possibility reminds us that history is always provisional, waiting for the next find to shift our understanding. The Maya story is unfinished, and perhaps that is its power. Every unanswered question draws us deeper, urging us to listen not only to stones, but to silence. The Maya story does not end with collapse or conquest. It lingers in stones, in languages, in the very soil where maize still grows. To look back across 3,000 years of achievement is to see a civilization that rivaled any of the ancient world in brilliance. They charted the heavens with such precision that their calendars outpaced Europe's Tooth and Helve. They engineered water systems that sustained cities larger than any in North America until modern times. They built temples aligned with solstices, ball courts that echoed with myth palaces that blended architecture with ideology. Their glyphs captured memory, their art immortalized devotion, their rituals bound society to the cosmos. And yet, their fragility is as instructive as their genius. The classic collapse revealed the perils of overuse when fields exhausted and reservoirs fouled. The post-classic resurgence at Chichén Itzá showed the power of adaptation through spectacle and trade. The long resistance against Spanish conquest, ending only in 1697 at Lake Chichén Itzá, demonstrated resilience unmatched in the Americas. And today, the persistence of millions of Maya people proves that identity cannot be conquered, only transformed. For modern audiences, the lessons are clear. Civilization rests not only on ingenuity but on balance. The Maya remind us that brilliance in mathematics and astronomy cannot insulate against environmental limits, that monuments cannot feed hungry fields, that rulers who tie legitimacy to divine spectacle risk collapse when nature refuses to obey. But they also remind us of resilience, how traditions survive conquest, how languages endure suppression, how memory passes through generations even when cities fall silent. Standing before an unfinished altar in Copán, one feels the silence of collapse. Standing before El Castillo in Chichén Itzá, one feels the roar of reinvention. Diving into the sacred cenote, one confronts the desperation of faith. Gazing at nitrogen traces in lake cores, one hears the quiet withdrawal of farmers from failing fields. And reading the glyphs of Palenque, one encounters kings who proclaimed themselves divine, yet whose bones lie as fragile as ours. These contrasts are not contradictions, but reminders that civilizations are human, ingenious, ambitious, and vulnerable all at once. The Maya legacy is more than ruins. It is alive in huipils, woven with cosmic symbols in children speaking Quiche or Yucatec, in rituals performed at caves and springs. It is alive in the work of archaeologists and physicists who bring new tools, LiDAR DNA muons, to uncover secrets still hidden beneath stone. It is alive in the questions we ask and in the humility those questions demand. The Maya are not a vanished people. They are neighbors, teachers, and descendants of a past that still shapes our present. And so the story closes not with disappearance, but with continuity. The unfinished altar, the hidden tomb, the blood spilled on stone, all belong to a history that warns and inspires. The Maya teach that collapse is transformation, that resilience is quiet endurance, that brilliance and fragility walk hand in hand. To study them is to glimpse both the heights of human creativity and the costs of imbalance. Their legacy is not only in ruins, but in relevance. As our own world faces challenges of climate resource strain and political fragility, the Maya whisper across centuries ingenuity must be matched with restraint, spectacle with sustainability, power with humility. To ignore that whisper is to risk repeating their fate. To heed it is to honor their endurance.